Welcome to another episode of Elevating Laramie with the Laramie Chamber Business Alliance, and today we have Josie Voigt, who runs Impact 307 for the University of Wyoming, with us. And as we always do, we always like to dive in with kind of a little bit about you. So what's your story? How'd you end up in Laramie? Where are you from? What part of the state did you grow up in, if you grew up in the state?
Sure. So I actually was born and raised here in Laramie, and I went to high school in Lusk, Wyoming, which is a small cow town. So I feel like I've had that kind of background and knowledge of coming from the most rural county in the state, which is Niobrara County, back to University of Wyoming, and came here, got a couple of degrees, one in Earth and Space Science, secondary education, and one in geography, natural resource management, recreation. So that's kind of my passions in my schooling. I then followed my fiance to Wheatland, Chugwater area, where he got a job, and then we got married and spent several years in that area of the world. I worked several restaurateuring jobs, mostly waitressing. My dad owned a restaurant in Chugwater for a while, so I was helping manage that, and had a couple babies along the way. So what brought us back to Laramie was after our second was born, we were just wanting the culture, the substance that's in Laramie for our kids, really. I knew the schools were really good growing up here myself. I knew the opportunities that exist in Laramie, and I just was really yearning for that. We miss the small town. There's some really great aspects of the small town community, getting to know everybody, but we feel like now that we've been back here in Laramie for about 10 years with our two kids, we are, establishing some more of those deeper roots again, and becoming members and more ingrained in the community ourselves. So
I think that's kind of a weird thing about Laramie, because we always talk about how friendly it is, but because it's so transient with our education stuff with LCCC, the university, and Wyotech, I think we have kind of there's a disconnect. Once you've been here 4 or 5 years, like, people are like, oh, you're gonna stick around, and then you're very pulled in.
Yeah.
But we've got to figure out one of the things we're working hard as an organization. How do you bridge that gap? How do you make people feel included? How do you help them build those the deeper relationships that make it stickier?
Yeah, we're looking at similar things at Impact 307 with the business incubation. I think traditional business incubator models have like a 3-year graduation rate. They like to get them in, turn them around, make them, have income, and then boot them out. If we were to do that, they would go to Colorado right away. So I think our trajectory, our path is a little bit longer, a little bit more built for sustainability and ingraining in the communities, so that they feel like they're really part of something before they graduate.
Yeah.
So
is there? I don't even know this. Is there like a graduation? Is that like a structured, I'm in a degree, I did this with my business, and then is that a thing there?
So we're revamping kind of the graduation process for our clients. It has, to my knowledge, it's not been a formal thing, but then again, there wasn't a whole lot of succession before me.
Right.
So a lot of what I'll tell you is probably just my own perception of what exists and the framework that we want to build for the incubator space. But we are looking at more of a 7-8 year kind of a trajectory for our clients. Start them out at a very affordable rate, get them really connected, resourced, connected to other opportunities, and then, like I said, connect them in the community. Hopefully in that time we can also influence them to give back and really, have this symbiosis rather than just a feed me all the time.
I think I have seen some of those other startup models, and it's like, if you're not here by this point, you're out of the program.
Sure.
And I hear here's the thing that blows my mind, because entrepreneurship is so hands-on and company specific. They're like, I have this problem today, and that's all that's fully consuming to them.
Yeah.
And so, but we try to apply some models where we're like, well, the Silicon Valley did.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the Silicon Valley.
Yes.
And I think you get kind of the front line of that. I get to work with your clients when they're like, oh, hey, here's a problem I ran into that I know you know something about.
Yes.
And so I get kind of the one-off. And one of the things that we've tried to work in and would like to develop more is how do we take some of these resources that we know exist in town, and I'm talking people resources. It's not the traditional entrepreneur. How do I get money? How do I get supply chain? How do I get? But like, there's people who solve this stuff in town, and how do we make sure that they know that these resources exist and just work in progress? Because I always think of it after somebody's like, do you know anybody who knows? And then I'm like, yeah, Keith does, or yeah, Bob does, or
yeah, no, absolutely, I hear you. I think a lot of our clients have kind of this issue, maybe it's an imposter syndrome of sorts, of they're the only one doing what they're doing in town, so there's not this network, there's not this apparent network. But I think once you kind of scratch that surface a little and like peel that back and say, you know what, there's something tangential here. We can connect you with this person. They're fine to share what they're doing. Like it does help to have kind of a role model or someone who's willing to take you under their wing and provide those resources or opportunities. So that's definitely something that I've seen in our clients, is this thirst for other like-minded businesses. So one of the things that we've done is actually some lunches based on industry. So we have, especially related to University of Wyoming, because we are aiming to develop faculty and student startups and spin-outs. So a lot of those are lab-based, like research-based, and a few of them are manufacturing related. So we've developed a couple of, or hosted a couple of lunches last semester, which were focused just on those two groups and developing the networks among those groups. So I think that goes a long way too, because once you hear someone introduce themselves and you can kind of think of the different aspects of their business that might connect to yours, I think it's a lot easier to make those connections. Once you've been in the same room, broken some bread together, it's much easier.
I'm a big eater, so I'm very good at it. But I do think that I do think that that's a big, like, I started asking a couple of years ago as I would do panels, I would say, how many people here have asked somebody over to dinner when they know they're new to town? And there would be like 0 hands. And I'm not very good at it either, because we're always doing events with this, and I think a lot of it goes with the event kind of culture of our town. You got to get to Grand Fleur, you got to get to, and then and then there's 6 weekends of football, and everybody's just like, then there are times like, I don't know, but doing that, and I love the lunch I got to participate in, because it gave me some context to the questions that your clients are facing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and your expertise in the field of networking is amazing and super beneficial, and it's good for our clients to hear that and to hear about like giving back and being part of a community. I think that, as I already kind of mentioned, I get the feeling sometimes from some of our clients that they want as much as they can get, and they're not really interested in giving back, and that's not how it works. I don't think that's how laws of nature work.
Yeah,
like,
it isn't.
Give and get. So
I tell my kids, so they're 21 and 17, and like we have 3 rules. 3 rules are attitude, effort, and how you treat other people. And they've been hearing that their whole life. And then I always say, you're gonna get what you give, because it's not I'm gonna get what what everybody's willing to give, and then I don't have to do anything. And so that's kind of another, like, just subcontext they hear all the time. And then the other one that I tell them is, it's who you know and how well you know them. And that's really, entrepreneurship at its core is you have to get that part. How well do you know your supplier? How are you going to move up their priority list? And a lot of it doesn't have to do. Everybody thinks it's cash, but a lot of it has to do with, did you know it was their anniversary last week? Did you know they just had a baby and were out? Did you, whatever those things that are driving their personal life. And I think in business so often we try to do the equation, and the equation doesn't have as much to do with as the, what's the connection. So I was like, and I I've been fortunate enough to know several of your clients over the years, and a lot of them right now, just because here's a one-off issue they're dealing with, and they think I might know. And so I love working with you, and how do we shape this to be more, I hate the term organic, not because I hate organics, but because it's such a gray area term in business. Like, we want this to be organic. Well, it takes getting to know problems and getting to know people. And those are both things I think social media have a little bit driven off.
Sure, yeah, there are some disconnects, but
yeah. So what do you think the biggest, I know, you started as the WTBC, and that was the brand at that time, and then it evolved kind of in COVID era, so I think it got lost a little bit in the Impact 307, and then there've been, just changes. It's, been run through the university, and so, personnel and which direction the university is going, and how do we leverage, and how do we talk a little bit about how, the brand evolved, and then also kind of the services and concept have evolved even since you've been there.
Yeah. So, and I might use the word default a little because over the past year, there's been some dramatic changes to Impact 307. I think there were approximately like 12 people on about 2 years ago, and they were running programs. This was staff of Impact 307 that were running programs throughout the state, entrepreneurship competitions in different counties, as well as running incubator spaces in multiple cities in Wyoming. Currently, we've retracted all of those entrepreneurship competition programs, and so aren't hosting any more of those. And then as far as incubation spaces, we just have the Laramie facility, and we currently have a Casper facility. We're not doing a good job of running that because I'm the assistant director. I work under a supervisor who's also like managing a couple of other units, and so we just don't have the budget nor the staff to run adequately the Casper facility. So we're looking at what to do with that. As far as Laramie goes, I mentioned we're kind of changing our focus. So in the past, it had been open to a broader variety of business types. Currently, we're really focused on STEM-related fields, especially and really only at this point staff and faculty. University of Wyoming faculty and student derived companies. So startups and spin-outs from the university. Ideally, we'd like to have them be university IP related, so that IP and licensure of that IP will eventually feed back into the university system, and it'll, it also helps grease the wheel, if you will, for our programming and help pay for that. Another just huge thing with federal funding changes is the change of indirect funding for the unit that I work under. So the Research and Economic Development Division is where Impact 307 is housed, and their funding is going to be dramatically impacted by federal changes, basically limitations on the indirect funds that come to University of Wyoming. It used to be 44%. I believe it's moving closer to 15%. So that's approximately $2 million just in the next fiscal year if a few of those changes happen. So I mean, that means more jobs and more programming, and so more cuts. I don't know, maybe I need to start looking for a job myself, but yeah, so the future is a little unpredictable. We don't know where our budget's at, but still hopeful, and what brings me to work every day is working with our clients and helping to feel like we are growing businesses that are unique in Wyoming. So like I said, the STEM related fields are highly intriguing. We also have some bio research that's happening in our facility, so that's interesting and pretty unique.
I think it's an interesting, like, the model of taking kind of, we'll just call it funded research, because I'm not even sure all the time where that comes from, that takes place really on the campus side, and how that evolves into maybe some IP. And then how do you convert the IP from this was research to now it's a product to now it's profitable?
Yes.
and
Yes.
all those phases.
And I'm still learning so much too. It's a new world. It's a new language for me. Both running an incubator, but also that TTO world, the technology transfer, and how you deal with the licensure, and where do you go for the IP protection, and yeah, how do we resource our faculty who are doing these activities on campus. There are some grants available right now through University of Wyoming, so the university is really encouraging a lot of our faculty to go this route, to start a business. And so I think that's cool. And I've heard talk of some other levers at the university kind of being pulled in the direction of encouraging more entrepreneurial thinking among faculty. So maybe that'll change some of the requirements,
And that's a big cultural shift. I think everybody's, in business we so often work in, I'm going to pivot and that happens today. And in kind of a culture and bureaucratic layers, right? That cultural shift takes a lot different than business. And so, when you're talking in business, to people that do, especially startups, because they'll pivot very quickly, versus a kind of a endemic cultural system, those are very hard to do. And I know that when Arun joined, that was, he's got a background in that transfer world, and that's, it's a whole different, that's legal, cultural, it's a 5-layer system at least in that. And so I think it's hard because you're talking 2 different worlds and 2 different cultures. And so how do you get to navigate that?
Oh, it's tricky, and I find myself getting out over my skis. I've been told that several times, not by my current supervisor, but I think I operate a little bit more kind of independent thought. I'm not used to the layers, like you say, and so it is tricky, and I find myself really impatient with it. I'm just kind of an impatient person anyway. But yeah, it is really tricky. I think what it calls for is, like we said earlier, is those connections to those other units on campus, and really like developing those layers so that there's transparency between them and good communication. Because if there's not, like, you just hit a wall and like you can't proceed. And so that's what I've been trying to do, and with the support of my supervisor, and I've got an assistant that works for us, and had a student intern last semester. So we're a small team, but we're trying to really take care of clients and develop some new processes. One of the processes we've looked at is actually like safety within our buildings. We have a couple of lab facilities, and looking at that and trying to understand what's been done in the past as far as like just chemical management has been really interesting. So that's one of those things, like, I would not even be interested in it if I had any other job, but because I'm like required to do it, like, it's been this huge learning curve. But then learning how to navigate all these other pieces, the UW safety office and general counsel and the client themselves, and having to make alterations, like it's a lot. So figuring out how to communicate with all those pieces and all those entities.
One of the companies that we helped site in the building, even getting down to like, how do you drill something into the wall, because of kind of that cultural system is really, it's tricky to navigate, and it isn't conducive. And I think that's one of the things that is a challenge that we end up both, it's a joint challenge, because, in order to be efficient and work at the speed of business, and then, but how do you have that overlay is tricky. And the building wasn't designed to be lab space. I mean, there's lab spaces in the building, but it wasn't, as we've talked, over the last, I guess, year and a half with the, between the university and the NSF grant and the regional partnership, and these other towns are like, oh, we have a lab that's, it's got joint equipment, it's got da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and we're like, what? And so, it's, now there's these places, Fort Collins has one that's very purpose designed for being a joint lab space. And so, I mean, there's that navigation, and then I've been shocked at what the costs are on some of these things as we look at it.
They can get real pricey real quick. It's interesting to me, and the whole conversation kind of lends itself to me to thinking, are we trying to be everything to everybody? Because I think we are. We're
Yeah.
very small, like one person, and then trying to learn, not only how to manage incubator space with few resources, but trying to learn the lab safety and trying to learn
it's all the
parking and trying to learn
all
other
things
pieces
that maybe should have been on the ground level, right? The foundational level of where we gonna park.
Right.
What's our safety requirement gonna be?
Right.
And it grows up, and then you're trying to manage, and I suppose there's always some tension in that as you grow businesses, but it's kind of like, what order do we do it in?
Mm-hmm.
And you're having to go back.
Yes, puzzling that currently.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, with all the changes, where does the startup competitions, where do those live now?
So not in our units. We don't have any, Impact 307's not hosting any. So those, I would say that the College of Business on campus is the best resource for
that lives in Elbogen
the John
now.
P. Elbogen, 50K.
And so it would kind of be, and I'm a very visual person, so you would do Elbogen and then graduate, use the academic term, and then you could graduate potentially into Impact 307.
Yeah.
Is kind of the deal. So you'd start in business, that's your intertie between student driven and maybe faculty driven. And I know you have one client now that was Mark and Leo with Maple, that was faculty and student, did Elbogen,
Yes.
now are a client.
Now they are a client of ours.
They're kind of a fun story because it's the most off the wall deal. And just by way of background, there's an element in the maple sap that is antibacterial and safe for kids. And so Mark figured out a way to structure it to be a dental, like mouthwash. And now they're out, they manufacture it, and they are out doing sampling and attending conventions, and you can get it, and I actually have a bottle on my desk over here. But that's kind of a fun story from that academic evolution to product. So what are the biggest, challenges that you gotta help them with in terms of?
For them, it's been the space. So finding lab space that has water for them has been the trick. And we have identified an office, so we will be housing them in an adequate space here soon. So.
But it's funny because you think challenge. We don't ever think in the modern Western world water.
Right. Yeah, the office space that we have accommodated them in just does not have the suitable water supply for them. So I'm learning a lot too as a landlord of, hey, what questions to ask, what is your production like, what do you need?
Yeah. What's the craziest challenge you've had to face since you took this job?
I don't know.
Like off the wall, not contentious or not the stressful ones, because there's more like, I feel like in entrepreneurship it's more like the random one that you're like, and pause.
Yeah. I think maybe just the cultural shift, like changing the expectations as far as parking. I came in actually first day after talking to my supervisor prior to meeting the clients. It was like their first day and having a pizza party, and I came in first day and was like, guess what, we're taking away your parking. And that was just like such an awful way to begin communications with people. But yeah, I was already really gung-ho about change and about hey, we need to save this place money, and why are we doing these activities that are costing Impact 307 more? But it's a tender balance. You got to find the right environment for these startups to come into. They need to feel welcome, and permitted parking is not exactly the most welcoming.
No, it's probably from your clients. It's always generally it's not the lead punch, right?
No.
But at some point, parking comes up in every conversation,
Right.
And I had to get a parking pass.
Right, exactly. So, but we looked at that and the expense that we were paying for that as a group. like it just didn't make sense, and it wasn't even across the board. So one office, same size might have 10 people that were paying 10 different parking passes, and then the other one might have 2. So the way we were paying for it also didn't make sense. So instead of like balancing that out and saying, oh, everybody only needs one, we just said, nope, we don't have the budget for this anyway. Like, wipe the slate clean. You can park, it's only a quarter of a block to Harney where you can park for free. So you can either go get a permit on your own for $100 a year, or $120, I think is what it is, or you can make this choice. And so that one, especially first day, that was awful of me.
That's a horrible bullet to bite right out of the gate.
Yeah, I didn't start out on the right foot, Brad, but
yeah, and you just gotta keep making all those cultural changes.
And I'm just making little mistakes, and I keep picking myself up, dusting myself off, and.
So I know in your previous role with the university, you had a lot to do with the elbogan and that coordination. Like, what's the biggest kind of cultural shift from hey, we're excited and we're business and it's new and to okay, now we have to how do you make that mind shift? And I only do this because I also grew up with the entrepreneurial parents. We had shoe stores, and so my mom used to always say, you know what happens if somebody doesn't show up to clean the toilet today? That means we clean the toilet. And so that you grow up in a small business family,
sure,
it's a big shift.
Yeah, I think that it has been a bit of a shift for me. I think just kind of picking up all the pieces and figuring out which pieces of it to manage, because I didn't have a supervisor when I came in, so finding that internet connection and that phone line and learning how to deliver the mail, and actually reassigning all the mailboxes because they didn't make any sense when I first arrived, and putting signage up and trying to brand things so that we have kind of a cohesive building identity. It's been a lot of fun, but it's also been super challenging to think, okay, how could I manage this? How could I piece this together? What resources can I pull on to help educate my clientele? Because I do check-ins with the clients too. The intention is to do them quarterly to help measure their growth and ensure the graduation, we're progressing toward that eventually. So hearing what their feedback is, and then trying to find the right pieces to plug in, like for the event that we hosted with you, it was the power of networking and utilizing these other groups and people that are around you to help support you and just become more involved in your community, really, because that is something that is lacking among our clients. So finding the different people who are willing to come in and volunteer and meet with our clients, and then trying to keep the energy going in the building with some of these events and bringing people in too. I think that has been really intriguing. That's actually been the most fun part of my position, is the event planning part of.
Well, it's always way better than the emails and the administration, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I gotta answer that email. Dang it. Yeah. But hey, let's have a barbecue.
Yeah, exactly. It all feels better.
What would you say the funnest part? We've talked about a lot of challenges, but the events are fun. What's been the most rewarding?
I would say probably just seeing some of the progress of a couple of our clients have just taken off, and one of them in particular, and I'm sure you know them, Uplink Robotics, they've been so near and dear to me ever since I was at College of Business working the John P. Evelgan, because they were one of the teams that I helped with, and I paired them with their first mentor, and they still have that mentor, and that's really cool to be part of that matchmaking process, and I still follow both of them and just follow their progress. We have the check-ins, so I get to see what they're working on. I get to see their harebrained ideas, and actually the founder of that, Christian Bitsis, has come up with a really, really cool tool.
He brought it in the other day.
So just really excited for them and their trajectory, and to keep supporting them. I just feel like their energy is contagious. So anytime we need a shot in the arm,
wander
go down
the
and
hall.
talk to Uplinks.
I try to go and just see what cool new stuff they have, because it's always, they have some of the cool, it started with, and I remember at their Elbogen presentation, I was probably the worst skeptic, right? I'm like, it's a remote control car. And then as I've watched it evolve and like, in Elbogen, I think we get to see like, you see the idea, but you don't see these entrepreneurs are so many miles ahead of what the concept product that they have at the Elbogen is, and like watching like this thing come to fruition over the time is like, I'm like, how'd you guys figure that out? They're like, oh, we just, it's over here and that's printing this and this is doing this and we figured it out. And I'm like, now I see, because I was at that Elbogen, now I see that. And I'm like, yeah, y'all are a lot smarter than me.
They're a really smart group, and they're eager to give back. That's one of the other really cool things. They have the 4-H group that comes in every Monday to our facility, and they're doing robotics in there, and the uplinks, staff are teaching these kids, and my kids have been part of that, so I know how cool it is.
But I think they've had some kids come and intern out of that, right? Like
they have a ton of
they've
interns.
developed a workforce in a highly specialized area in a town. Like, you just wouldn't say like Laramie robotics, but they've been able to develop that from working with those kids that now they have employees and interns that
they work a lot with UW like intern undergrad program too for student interns, so
they have cool stuff. One of the like, they always have like a new idea, and like they've got somewhere I'm like, I would have never thought that that you could do that with a robot instead of that's crazy, and I won't talk about it because I'm not sure what's like proprietary and what's not, but I'm like, yeah, that makes perfectly good sense. It's way better use. So they're always fun, and I love talking to that group, and Christian in particular, because he's more of the talking about the entrepreneurial versus the cultural mindset. Like, he's like, here's a problem and I'm gonna just solve it, and he did it on the weekends. And he's like, I've worked on this for about 4 weekends, and now here's like a real live thing that's working, and I'm like, holy crap. So a lot of fun.
They are inspirational for sure.
Have you gotten to work with, so I know Uplink was when you were doing Elbogen. Are there any other ones that are up there that came through that kind of Elbogen graduation impact?
We, not particularly that I'm aware of. We do have, Carbonado. I think they're leaving at the end of this month though, so, and Carbon just went through 50K, so. It's exciting stuff.
It's crazy.
For them.
It's good impact. I think one of the things that is a struggle kind of in our roles is, how do you provide value? And, from that chamber side, but even working with some of your companies, is how do you provide value, and what one business finds valuable is not always what another business finds valuable, and you even end up, the challenge of leadership is you end up where, you're running an organization and one company finds something super valuable and the other one finds it a super hindrance, right? And how do you find the balance in that and still provide value to both? And I know that's something you've been working through and struggling through a bunch. I mean, it's always a struggle, right? The struggle of leadership is balance. So you got any great tips for how to handle that?
I think maybe just, in my own experience, transparency and communication of what is the value, where is the alignment, where is the leadership seeking alignment, and to me it doesn't start through me, it comes through me because it's actually mandated like through the university. Like, we only have this much budget, we're gonna run things this way, we are going to align ourselves more maybe with safety than we have in the past, and that one has been a little bit of a struggle. And I mentioned it right now, we're in the thick of service agreement renewals, which is like our contract with like a tenant. Is kind of
it's like your lease.
In the real world, be a lease. We call it our service agreement because we're providing services and space with it. But that's been really interesting to figure out how that language needs to be implemented so that it applies to everyone, yet we only have really like 3 lab-based clients. So how do you communicate the change to everyone and have it be applicable to everyone, and yet still like with the aim of retaining these lab-based clients, but shifting that culture to be one of a little bit more, on my end, it's the perception of accountability is not there. So making sure that there is compliance with regulation, federal, state, and local regulation. And this, it's not something that's attractive or sexy to talk about, but it's safety for all the people in our building, not just one or two.
And I think you also have the overlay of
important.
It's a university facility, and then you've got the balance between, there's like the old mines building, and then there's Impact 307, built almost a century apart.
Yes.
And all there's concerns. But I think that's where part of the frustration from the clients comes from is the university's policy has to bridge 100 years differentiation in buildings, and they're like, but I'm in the new building. Yeah, for sure. I think there is the perception, and I think that's just, maybe it hasn't been communicated much with clients in the past of, hey, I can be nimble, I can be quick if I'm here at the incubator. But that's not true. Like, we do have checks in our system, we do have other units that we have to communicate with, and those units have their constraints too. So we can't, it's not that we can push something forward or hire someone to do something on our own. We do have a process. And that's hard to communicate, and it's hard to wear that weight sometimes and I think represent that. When we look at that, it's a system challenge, and I think that it's one of the things that has to get sorted out. And earlier we were talking about it's who you know and how well you know them, and it becomes really a factor of trust. And that's absolutely. The more bureaucratic you get, the less trust you have, and the less bureaucratic you are, the more trust you have. But tends to sometimes erode some of those safety checks. And so how do you find the balance in that, in those two systems to create something that works and can be functional for, both the university system and the clients? Yes. I think that's we've got to find that alignment somewhere. We're working on it. So, well, I sure appreciate all you're doing and appreciate being included, because it's kind of like, typically the graduation point for where the interface comes between, somebody moving from a client of yours and into the general pop is space, right? And so it helps as I know what your clients are looking for and facing, to be able to serve them, and here's a spot you can graduate into with space as you're generating revenue, and that's really the point at which we have to do it. Is how do you move from point A to point B, and it's usually real estate. Well, I hope we can get you some more warm handoffs, and I try to keep abreast of different listings and stuff too, just to be able to tell our clients, you know what, hey, you're actually getting a great deal here. We truly are, and we need to, that's another policy thing, we do need to raise our rates at the university, which we will. It's on my radar. Well, I promise they'll do it. We need to be, fair to the community too. I don't want to be undercutting our downtown neighbors. Well, it's one of the things that we find, systemically across the country, right, is there are these incubators and companies are in them, and part of the real estate play is to have them graduate, and that's like how some of these other universities have done, is like, hey, you're gonna be in here and it's gonna be super cheap and it's gonna be awesome, but then their goal is to have them making enough money so that they can pay the $20 a square foot right now. And so they're really pushing them like, we want you to go over to this space as quick as we can, and it's just kind of a cultural thing that I've noted as I've talked to the other places that have incubators, is I'm like, well, because you're trying to get them into this other space that's higher value. Right. And that's not really how our system in Laramie works, is we have this higher value, lower cost space that then you go to this is what the real world costs. Right. And that leap is a little bit too, they're like, well, I think I'd rather stay in my safe spot. I'd rather stay in the safe spot. Sometimes I personally just get conflicted with,
what am I serving? Where am I?
Yeah.
Am I really helping in this, or am I enabling too much? You know.
I think in entrepreneurship,
It's
though,
a hard balance.
the goal is growth.
Yeah.
And we have to just remind ourselves that the goal is always growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, it's more about feeding the system sometimes that allows the people that should be ready to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So I look forward to, I mean, it'll probably be something we're talking about in 5 years, just like, how do we do this? We're probably not gonna solve it today, but like, how do you keep doing it? From our side, it's always that we're allowed to be nimble, right? That's part of what we do. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm never afraid to try something and then, you know, go, okay, that wasn't the best. And, you know, I'm not afraid of the mistake, which is the nice thing about being on the highly bureaucratic side is I can make a mistake and okay, next again, try another thing. And I think we'll just keep working with you on, we'll try some things, and if they work, great, and if they don't, we'll try another thing. And to try to keep that flow so that people can say, here's the path from point A, I've got an idea in my lab on campus, and maybe they do the Elbogan, maybe they're just ready to launch without Elbogan, and then they're move into impact, and then, you know, there's a path to move on from impact after. And so look forward to developing that ecosystem with you and contributing any way we can.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it.
Well, awesome. Thanks for coming down today, and this is another episode of Elevating Laramie with the Laramie Chamber Business Alliance. Thanks, Josie, for joining us today. Impact 307 for all your startup needs.